or multiple imaginary opponents. Each kata describes how a swordsman should respond to the specific situation, such as when you encounter a surprise attack from an opponent seated in front of you, or an attack from multiple opponents as you are walking. The roots of iaido date back some 400 years. Today it's primarily a method of self-refinement. The instructor, Bradley Anderson, started studying the sword in 1996 while living and working in Japan. The dojo opened in Moorhead in 2008 and continues in South Fargo today. So let's give it up for Agassiz Dojo, guys.
Ina-san, konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa.
You guys just learned that one, right? Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa.
All right, thank you. 私はブラッドリー・アンダーソンと申しますが、こちらは Agassiz Dojo です。My name is Bradley Anderson and we're with the Agassiz Dojo. 1996年に 日本に寄港していろいろ仕事をして勉強しました。So I went to Japan in '96 for work and came back and started studying iaido. Went there, started studying kendo and iaido and some other things. And today we're going to show you a few different things. What you just saw was kenjutsu. It's called tachiuchi no kurai. And it's a sword versus sword. And we use wooden swords for that. So now we got a couple of students, Tyler and Sarah, are going to show you some iaido. Iaido is, as Conrad mentioned, a series of patterns against one or multiple opponents. And we study at Japan Kendo Federation set of kata. There are 12 of those. We also have an older set called Muso Shinden-ryu, which has 48. So there's a lot of stuff to learn there and try to become competent at. So what we use is a dull sword called an iaido. It's made out of aluminum zinc alloy and is forged basically from aluminum, right? So, but the rest of the sword is put together much like a regular Japanese sword. And these swords are all made in Japan. The nice thing about it is the blade is dull. The tip is sharp, but the blade is dull, so less chance of cutting yourself or someone else, although they are still sort of sharp. So we're going to show you guys some iaido today. We're going to show you some jodo, which is sword versus stick, and then we're going to see what we have time left for. But we're located in Fargo, North Dakota. We're over here at the table with the Yute Karate team. Feel free to check us out. So sometimes you see scenarios where the person may be sitting next to us. The one that Sarah did, there's somebody's coming through the mist and they can't see you, but you happen to see them first. So you get the edge on them that way. And as they come up, you tap on the floor to bring them closer. And as they do, you're able to attack them. The next one Sarah's doing is called well, the next one she's doing is where you're on a narrow plot of land or a narrow bridge, and there's people lined up coming at you, and so you're able to draw against them. And there's three, it's just like a bad samurai movie. They all conveniently line up for you and come straight at you. So, but a lot of these, for example, might be on a bridge, might be underneath a house, might be in the mist, someplace where you're low visibility. You've got narrow rooms, you've got things like that. So one or multiple opponents. One of the ones I'll be doing is against 4 opponents. It's called Shihogiri, 4-directional cut. And we'll do some of that now, but we're doing a mix of the Seite, which has that, again, I said the 12 patterns, and then the Muso Shinden-ryu, which has 48.
as we do various kata and are presented with different scenarios, we might be seated in different ways. Mike on the left end was seated in something called tadahiza, which was more useful when you're wearing traditional samurai armor. If you can picture, the standard samurai you see in a movie, he's wearing heavy armor and it's only split at the sides. So you can't sit on your knees like you saw Tyler and I doing momentarily. So sitting in tadahiza allows us to get up, bring our legs in, and then draw that sword accordingly. Sometimes, depending on the kata that we're doing, our opponent may be coming from us from an indirect motion. So in the one that Mike is doing currently, someone coming from the side, we're then rising up and attacking that person from that point. There's different ways to sheath your sword as well. Oftentimes, a kata will have something called shiburi, either a flat one, drawing your sword out to the side, or a round one called a morichiburi, which symbolizes the cleansing of the sword after you've dispatched your opponent. Typically, sometimes in movies, this might be blood spatter or something like to that nature, but for us, it represents the cleansing of our kata at the end of it. So again, Sensei is doing that tadahiza step. And in this case, he's dispatching, like he mentioned a moment ago, 4 opponents. First one, striking, or what we call ski to the back, taking one person, and then moving in 4 different directions as people would come in to attack. Some of these don't seem realistic, but it forces you to embrace the direction and what's going on around you. As you can see, we don't have opponents. Unlike in kenjutsu that they were demonstrating earlier, we have to imagine each person as they attack us, how they come at us, what they're doing, and what their reactions might be. So it can be quite difficult to tell a story in each of these circumstances. Regardless of whether it's a basic kata or an advanced kata, there's always 4 parts. The first part being a draw, either represented as a outward draw called nikitsuke, or something like a pulling draw called nukiuchi. And followed by that is an overhead cut of some type, known as kirioroshi. Followed by that shiburi, that cleansing motion. And then when we sheath our swords, doing a move known as noto. And so noto being not necessarily putting the sword into the scabbard as much as it's putting the scabbard onto the sword, which is quite different. One of the difficult things to learn as a beginner, or especially as you develop into more advanced swords, is knowing the shape of your scabbard, because should you put it on wrong, they're made of wood and they can split and crack. Each scabbard is individual to that sword unless you request to have another made at that time. Swords are not made with stamped saya, meaning you would have to send it to a swordsman to have that repaired or to have a new one crafted according to your blade. So it's very important that you pay just as much attention to your scabbard, which is known as a saya, as it is to pay attention to the cleanliness and safety of your blade.
So as I mentioned, the tools that we use are the wooden swords, the mokuto and the jo, which you'll see next. And then the iaido, which is a dull sword. My sword is actually a shinken, it's razor sharp, and this is what I practice with. The nice thing about having things like using the Japanese sword, there's a lot of culture around it, history as well, and it's a big part of Japanese culture and history. And I know when I started, I was using a dull sword given to me by my sensei in Japan, and I still treasure it. It was a little too small and it was really heavy, but it was a good place to start. And he used it for 10 years before I did, so that was kind of neat. But once you get your own sword, it's kind of neat because you can personalize it, you can make it look the way you want. What they're doing right now is jodo, and what you saw us doing with iaido, there's no opponent, it's in our mind. When we do jodo or we do the kenjutsu, it puts the opponent in the room, and that's a huge part that makes the iaido more real. So really well coordination between Jo, Tachi Uchi no Karai, and iaido, because now we have the opponent here. The opponent is attacking us or responding. It teaches us timing, it teaches us distance, all those things that you don't necessarily get with just the iaido and imagining the opponent. There are 12 jodo kata that we do. We're a member of the U.S. Kendo Federation. They're kind of our umbrella association. And when we test or something, these are the kata that we have to do. Most of my members, we've got quite a few that aren't here today, but most of my members have some rank in either iaido or jodo. To test, you actually have to stand in front of a panel of at least 5 high-ranking sensei. And when you test for jodo, you're tested both on the uchidachi, which is the sword, and on the jo, so you can pass or fail in 3 ways. You can pass or fail by the sword, by the jo, or also by missing some of the kihon, which is warm-up activities that you have to do as well.
It is intimidating. It's like, yeah, it doesn't look like much until you get inside of it, and then you see the strokes coming in.
Safety is the first in everything we do. We're always have to be aware of our surroundings. We always have to be aware of how far our sword reaches. We also have to be careful not to cut ourselves or someone else. You can see when someone's not ready in something, we have to pull our strike sometimes just to be safe. That's the most important thing. We've got people of all levels as well. Some people have been here for less than a year. Some people have been here for several years. We teach everybody together though, in a single class right now. If we grow enough, we'll probably separate those out. The jo is similar to some of the weapons you saw earlier. It's a walking stick, so everybody's got one, right? And it's very convenient to carry, to have on you or with you as you're hiking. So learning jo is actually kind of a very useful thing, even in today's climate, in today's world.
I was going to do before I had the cane too, because I can show that if you just use a cane, you can still do combos, still do jump up, still do roll up. You know, it doesn't matter. Use the properties of the weapon. And we only use it as much of it's great to actually apply, you know, counter block against the arms or whatever. So it's just a matter of how it close in. But you get, as we get, it's under the same principle. It's not about you have kind of grab it and stuff. You have this, you understand the principle. And whether it's in the bar or something. I think it's or something. Security Tuesday. Oh yeah, a long time ago.
Okay, so now we're going to do a couple setups to kind of help you guys visualize what's going on in the different kata. So this is another version of Shiho Giri. So in this one, there's 4 different opponents, and then our hero in the middle. You doing Shiho Giri?
This floor is hot.
You're doing Shiho Giri?
We have to shave.
Never mind, we're doing the seated one. So there would be a person behind him, there'd probably be somebody off to the side here, and then you've got the head honcho in the middle here. So, sensing the intent from the person in front of him, you know, he goes out, stuns them, feels the person coming and putting pressure on him from behind, thrust to his center, and then turns around to take out the one that was stunned previously. Do it one more time here. So as you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on in very brief amount of time. So it's all about awareness and sensing what's going on around you. So for this one here, we've got our heroes in the middle, probably being escorted by 2 guards because they've gotten in trouble or things like that. So I'm the boss man. So they're coming to talk to me, and some interesting stuff's gonna happen here. So she dispatches that guy, takes out that guy, and then takes me out as well. So this next one here is, again, our hero's getting attacked from multiple sides. So first he's got one in front he's going to take care of. So he cuts, and then he winds up driving down into his center, sends somebody coming from behind, goes to get that one, and then there happens to be a 3rd one behind coming to get him. He takes care of that one as well. Yeah, in this art, it's very much there's no middle ground. It's either win or lose. So making sure that you're the one coming out on top. Corey? So this is one of our old style. So we're sitting together in some sort of gathering, and the guy in the middle doesn't like us because we've probably done something wrong or he's in trouble. So he moves, takes that guy out. By the time I react, I'm down, that one's down, and then there'd be one more guy in the middle here, probably the boss man.
So the next one is from also our Seitei set. It's called Soichizuki. This one, he either has someone that's waiting in a doorway or someone who's escorting him. And he has to essentially do a quick draw. He only sees them at the last second. So he's coming along, he sees them, strikes, comes back, pokes them good. They fall off when he changes the sword like that. He shakes the blood off, called shiburi, and puts the sword away, which is noto. As you see, this is much different than what the Ryutei guys do. In this case, there's no two winners or nobody walking away except the guy who is fastest. So it's a little bit different because we're using katana. And the culture in Japan is really, or was really, if someone draws a sword, probably of the two people, there's only going to be one going home, if that. So it's a little bit different. We try not to get too gory with things, but it is what it is. It's a sword art. This one's called Uke Negashi, and so you're... So in this one, the guy comes from the side. He actually does make contact, which is blocked, and then countercut that comes from that. He puts the sword away. Each part of iaido, kata, is some kind of draw from the sword, which may be a cut, maybe a block. It is a series of cuts or blocks, with an overhead cut usually being the finish, and then shaking the blood off, which is chiburi, and then putting the sword away, which is noto. And you see, we're not, once you get familiar with the length of your sword and everything, we're using wooden ones now, but you don't look at your sword. Everything is done by muscle memory and all that. So learning iaido is just a continuous repetition and striving for perfection. And it's not as flashy as some things. It's very self perfection. So unlike kendo, which is where you have the bogu, and we'll be starting that this fall, where you wear armor and you try to score points. That's a very active sport, right? So it's a little bit different. Yeah, let's do Joe. We're gonna do a little bit more Joe.
So Sensei and Tyler are going to be going through the first half, or maybe a little more of a Seitei Jodo set. So you'll notice in every scenario, the Jo always comes up on top. And that's kind of the assumption here, is that the swordsman that you're facing off against maybe has never seen the Jo utilized in such a way, or they just aren't prepared to deal with it. So the jo itself is actually a very interesting weapon. It's got lots of different kind of techniques or different implements you can do with it. So you'll see there's different thrusts you can do to your opponent's sternum, or you can do a various overhead strikes, some that are kind of from below or from the side. There's also some different trapping techniques you can do where you're catching the sword and throwing your opponent off balance and then pushing them back. One thing that you'll see throughout all of these kata is at the very end, there's typically a pause point where the sword has surrendered and the jo holds him there just to make sure that he's not going to do anything else. So he's got the jo pointed at his eyes. The tachi surrenders, jo pulls back, and even when they bring the jo to the hip like that, there's a few different things you can do from that position, even if the sword were to come try to get you again. So that last strike that Sensei did there is called Higyotoshi, and it's actually very deceiving strike because it doesn't look like much, but the amount of power and force that kind of comes on the back side of that, because you're sliding your hand down and creating the acceleration through the weapon. There's times when you'll go to seminar with some of the super high ranking sensei and they'll literally be knocking swords out of people's hand. It'll go flying across the dojo. Interesting fact is jodo is relatively new in terms of like being accepted by the U.S. Kendo Federation, probably around 2016, somewhere in there. So it's been around in various old styles and things like that, but it's relatively new in terms of being a formally recognized martial art.
No. Yeah, it's sadly, so close.
So we were talking about the Seitei, which is the Kendo Federation set of patterns, 12 of them, and then our older style. Those 12 patterns came about from this association. A bunch of sensei came together, and the reason they formed them was because when they would come together for testing or for competitions, they couldn't tell if people were doing things right because it was completely different. It's old, it's secret, nobody knew it, right? So they said, we got to standardize something. So what they did was they came up with 7 standard kata or patterns, and then they added 3 more, and then they added 2 more. And so now there's 12. And so we were lucky that our old style, Muso Shinryu, actually has a couple of them that are in that seitei set. So we're going to show you a little bit of the difference between seitei, iai, and muso shinnyu. We're going to do the first one. Okay, so Sarah's doing what's called mai, which is the standard iaido, seitei iai, and Mike's doing the older muso shinnyu. So see if you can see it. We'll have him do it a couple times. See if you can see the differences because they're very subtle. Okay, so I know you guys can't really say anything, but we'll do it one more time, and this time I'll kind of call out the specific differences. So, swate. The first thing you notice is how they sit down. She sits forward, he sits down. Next thing you'll notice is when they draw the sword, just hold. When they draw the sword, she actually points her ska towards the ateki, the opponent, and he keeps it the way it is in his note, and he stomps. Now, when they do this furikaburi, he brings the tip of his sword between his ear and his shoulder, and she brings it towards her temple. And then he double slides, whereas she just extends her foot and cuts. And his cut is generally deeper than hers. Now when he does the chiburi, his tip can go down, and his finish is wider, whereas hers is more forward, and she cannot drop the tip on that chiburi. These are grading points too, so if you go test, they're going to look at every little thing. Next thing is, at the end, when they pop up and he takes his hands off, he slides his hand off, whereas she drops it. Our koryu, we slide the hand off. The reason for that is one thing is there might be stress from the battle, which means if you're wearing gloves, it's hard to unclench your hand. But the other thing is you're checking to make sure that everything is still attached. If you lose your ska, the handle, because the pin broke or something else, then it would be very hard to draw your sword again. So you're checking the integrity of that handle. Okay, sure. The next one is, we've only got time for one more, so whoever's ready. If you're ready, Tyler? Tyler's going to do Kinigashi? Okay. So again, Mike's going to do the older style. This kata is called Ryuto, and Tyler's going to do Seitei, which is called Uke Negashi. And they both have an opponent who's coming at them the same. It's just a matter of them, how they react. And this will be our last thing. Again, Tyler sits forward, he sits down. So when the attacker comes, they react. Go ahead. Tyler blocks, Mike steps out and then steps back in. And they both make essentially a cut that cuts across, and then they recenter. The chiburi here is the same, and they both drop down the same. So it's kind of neat to see the historical kata also in the other set because it makes it easier. But at the same time, we have to be able to distinguish in our head, turn off the switches for the old style when we're testing so we don't get nailed on inconsistency. Anyway, that's about all the time we have. I want to thank you guys for coming out. We are the Agassiz Dojo. We practice in South Fargo right now. And feel free to stop by and check us out either at the table today or at the dojo. Thank you again.